being in the tourist industry, and going to several places and seeing people come to Gettysburg all the time, I think what we're all trying to talk about here is actually visiting the sites, the historic sites, to get interested in them, and then eventually develop some sort of interest in the paranormal. And I think that's almost natural in places like battlefields or historic sites. The I liken it to when you come to Gettysburg or almost any Civil War battlefield where a lot of suffering took place and tumultuous things happened. I think you get a feeling there. It's kind of like walking into a church. It's just a building, but you feel different in it. And it's the same with the battlefield. A producer that I worked with early on, who was doing some videos of Gettysburg, said, that you can feel, you get out on the battlefield and you feel the great crush of souls out here. And I thought he put it very, very well. And that, I think, in other words, visiting these places is I think a really, really good way to get interested in the history, first of all, but then also in the folklore, which is what ghost stories are. And then hopefully you'll have some experiences yourself, and that will keep you coming back.
Craig?
Well, touching upon what Mark and Nicole said, is that Nicole, actually, I'm just going to rephrase something that she had kind of already said, but just get right down to it because it applies to me too. In all the years that I've been doing this, it seems to be an absolute 100% link between history and the paranormal, the stuff that I have found. They're inseparable. Right. They're one and the same. So I know that a lot of people want to drag religion into it, biblical stuff. I don't know how all that fits in, but I do know that there definitely seems to be more of a response if you're very familiar with the location. A lot of paranormal investigators don't realize it, but they're actually operating off a lot of urban legends. So It's very important to get the real story. Another thing that I usually tell people is that, because this has happened to me, because I give historical tours as well in Los Angeles. And the closer you get to the truth, the higher the chance something's going to happen. Because I'm kind of working under the theory that if you're just going to be talking about stuff that isn't true, you're not attracting anything. Whatever may be listening in doesn't relate to it, therefore does not get involved. But if you trigger something by talking about things, by hitting it, odds are very strong that you will have a better chance of getting a response. We tested this with Haunted Discoveries. We would spend days just talking about the history and interviewing historians, interviewing paranormal investigators, but also talking about the forgotten history that we came across, or maybe some corrections to some of the stories that are commonly told on the internet or revealed on the internet that aren't quite true or are taken out of context a bit. And then when it comes time to investigating, sometimes it's right from the very beginning. Sometimes it happens, an hour into the investigation. So I can't stress enough how important it is. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there, I hear it all the time about, I like to go into places cold. I don't want to know what's going on. I want to experience it. Then I'll make up my mind on what it is. And I think that's kind of like going to a doctor with, you've got something wrong with you. And the doctor says, don't tell me anything. Don't tell me anything. I don't want to know if it's your arm or your leg. I will tell you after I examine you. And I just think nobody wants to go to a doctor like that, right?
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
So
That's a really good analogy.
a lot of paranormal like property owners and stuff, you know, well, some of them may, take it seriously and be okay, and go with it. But I think a lot of them really appreciate more when you come in and you know something that they didn't expect you to know about the history, or maybe something that they didn't know. So that's how you want to score points with museum owners. You want to score points with property owners. What better way to show that you love a place than come in with a very strong working knowledge, beginning knowledge? I'm not saying going in as a know-it-all, because there's a lot more to gain from asking questions and interviewing and stuff. But you want to go in prepared.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because we had a museum that we investigated regularly in Vegas, and it was more or less our training ground where we brought our team. We would practice once a month, have our team meeting. And I did extensive research, not just on the property, the building that's there now, but on the history of the land. And it turns out that it's an old Mormon fort. And I started asking questions about, the Latter-day Saints. And, of course, it drifted off into polygamy. And once I started asking questions along that line, we were getting answers. Yeah. And everyone else in the group with me was like, how do you know that? It's like, well, I did my research. It's like, how else would you know? You got to do, I agree. You have to do the research in order to make the investigation more active, I think, personally.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say too, really quickly about the Rancho Buena Vista Adobe. The Huntington Library in San Marino, California has a lot of Cave Johnson Couts, old letters, just authentic archive material. So we spent a few days there going through all this material, and then just over the months really getting a good idea. I mean, I've even written a book on the place as well. Just really, really good idea about the history, and incorporating discussion and questions into our sessions. I will say, I will agree with you and back that up, that more questions were answered, and we did get more interaction with our knowledge developing, of the history, about the history of the property as it went on. Yeah. So it's really, gosh, it's so fascinating.
And we do have a question in the comments, but I do want to touch on one real quick, because I have a feeling that both may take a while. In case one of you has to leave, I want to make sure this one gets answered, because this was asked to me by people ahead of time. Make sure you ask this question. How do you guys determine the difference between fact, fiction, or legend?
It really is.
I can answer. I'll go first this time, if you guys don't mind, because I get asked that question a lot. The answer is, when you're looking. Okay, I investigate primarily. When I talk about research, I research on two fronts. One is the actual history, the nuts and bolts, the things that actually happen. And I'm looking for deaths. I run property deaths on, hotels and stuff. And I try to be as impartial as possible. That's another thing. You can connect the dots, but you really want to connect the dots correctly. And so I build a timeline and all that thing, and then just start filling it in. And the second part is I start tracing when these ghost stories first start appearing in the press and on other media. And that, believe it or not, that's your smoking gun in most cases, because it may be someone with a history of fabrication, of fabricating things. And so you almost have to fact check your source as well, when it comes to who's starting them and how was it used? Was it used for marketing, for Halloween when it was first introduced? These kind of things. And then you get a feel for the history, then you match it up and see where it lines up. The haunted history is, in my opinion, a part of a history of a building. It's like the social fabric. It's a kind of a layer that's added to it because enough people have been to these places and started telling these stories. But again, like with the Glen Tavern Inn, that started out as marketing for Halloween back in 1986, and some of the stuff that was said was ridiculous. About a murdered gambler in the room, and you start finding out that was actually not a historical thing at all, but that came from a psychic who had been hired and brought in to help create the marketing for that place. Am I saying that the Glen Tavern Inn is not haunted? Absolutely not. I've had experiences there, but you have to check to see where these stories began and who started them. And then you can backtrack into the records and see if there was like a gambler or stories of like the usual cliches, like a prostitute or some of these other things, and see, is there any likelihood that any of this thing could have existed at that time?
Mm-hmm.
My stuff's a broader range. I do a lot of urban legend and folklore and stuff like that. So one of our big cases was in St. Petersburg, Florida. There was an urban legend, a thing called mini lights. Mm-hmm. And if you said it 3 times, this voodoo queen with her gator boys would steal your children. And it's just this terrifying story. And everybody on one side of town had a different version than the other side of town. The south side was very serious. It was, do not mess with mini lights. It's a scary thing. And then you'd find out, a little further back, her story was she was mini lightning and she controlled the weather. And you go a little further back and she was stealing preachers' children's and stuff like that. And then finally we dig and find some early newspaper articles from around the 40s. So we're like, okay, it's probably from the 30s then. And we look around the 30s and, suddenly no more newspaper articles, but we talked to some people who were around that time, asking, hey, we need to know this. What do you know about it? And then we figure it out. And it was because there was an alligator farm. That's where these gator boys came from. There was an alligator farm in the 1930s, entertaining tourists. And if you've ever come to Florida, you go to an alligator farm, the alligators just lay there unless there's food, and they can't just. So what they did was this alligator farm would kidnap children and throw them into the pit to entertain tourists, African-American children mostly, because they were kids who weren't be missed. And so the story was beware of mini lights. The alligator men will get you was beware of the men with lights. The alligators, the alligator boys will steal your children. And suddenly, boom, again, the truth is much scarier than a haunted, voodoo queen. And, if we hadn't dug, that never would have come out. And the only reason we found it was an ad in a newspaper article that was, hey, come see the alligator feeding. And it had 2 little black kids being chased by alligators. And it's horrifying. And if we hadn't dug back, we wouldn't have seen it. And so, yes, the history is important. And if you don't look in, you're chasing a voodoo queen with alligator people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's pretty freaky.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, when I try and determine whether it's fact or fiction or fable or legend, I have to admit a good number of my stories from the first book I have to classify as legends because I really didn't know where they came from. I just heard the stories through the years as a park ranger there. And I'd hear them from old park rangers. And I was like, where'd you hear that? Oh, I've been hearing it for years and that type of thing. So those I have to classify as legends. And then later on, for example, you can do a lot of research, a lot of documentation just being on the battlefield itself, mainly because the monuments themselves are documents. They stand right where that particular unit of soldiers stood. In other words, the 20th Maine Monument on Little Round Top is right there in the middle of the line of the 20th Maine who fought in that spot. And most of them have a flank marker, which is a right flank or left flank. So you can literally stand in the spot where these soldiers stood and fought. And also on the monuments are the names of many of the soldiers that were killed or wounded. And so you can at the battle there. This is on virtually every Civil War battlefield. So you can use that if someone, for example, let me give you another example here. The covered bridge, Sachs Covered Bridge at Gettysburg, very famous place. Both Union and Confederate soldiers used it during the battle. And all of a sudden, I started hearing this rumor that some of the people that were haunting it were 3 soldiers who had been hanged in that bridge, deserters from the Confederate Army. And they caught them and they hanged them on that bridge. And so that doesn't make sense. I'm not buying that so I just went to the chief historian, made it easy. Not everybody can do that, but I went to the chief historian and I said, Kathy, what's the story on this? And she said, no, that couldn't have happened. We would have had a record of that because they always kept records of especially desertions or cowardice under fire when they had to execute somebody. And so that rumor, and I still hear it out there all the time, people talking about the 3 guys that were hanged at the bridge. But so some of the stuff at Gettysburg that I collected, I got to admit, it's legends. I can't trace it to anybody else. But some of the stuff is fact. I mean, you can tie it right together with some of the people that were there. Possibly the only soldier ghost that I can identify, that I've been able to identify, would be General Reynolds, John Reynolds, who was he was a major general, highest ranking officer in the Union Army, highest ranking officer at Gettysburg to be killed in battle. And I know this because there were at least 2 or 3 sightings of his ghost there, and they have described him to a T. And I even showed one fella a series of photographs, of officers, and I said, "Can you pick one? Can you pick out the one you saw?" And he pointed right to him. And so that it kind of helps when you have photographs, which we do of the Civil War soldiers, in historical archives. So it's not that difficult. I mean, it's not that difficult at Gettysburg, at any rate, to find out what the real history was and compare it with the ghosts that you see. What kind of uniforms did they have? Does that match up with the soldiers that fought here? Because we know where every unit fought. So that's basically how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was to trail off from that. There have been instances again at the Rancho Buena Vista Adobe, as well as other sites that we've investigated, where we will take, let's say, an EVP, a very compelling EVP capture, and compare that with some authentic archival information, and realize that it's a match. So, and that happened in some cases where we weren't even aware of that piece of history, but a paranormal and sort of encounter, in this case an EVP, actually led us to that. So I think, with fact and myth and fable and all of that, I think history can dispel that, but yet at the same time, I think legends and things can open up the doors to discovering more history. I also think too, and in addition, I look for consistency. So reputable sources that are, in a sense, sharing identical stories. There may be differences in the exact date and things like that, but consistency amongst reputable information. And if you can go back to original authentic archives, and you can actually use those to compare with, let's say, newspaper articles or books or what have you, that's important. But I do think there's a little bit of an intuitive component too. So just trusting your intuition and let that guide you, because many of us will say, you know what, that just sounds way too good to be true. And so going off of that, and then you can find out whether you're correct or not. So
Okay. And Paramontech, which should come first, the location research or historical research?
Well, when I did my book, Haunted by History, I had kind of a working knowledge, like a Wikipedia knowledge, sort of, just kind of the light scanning going in. But then again, I was looking for ideas to stage photo shoots in some of these haunted locations, and I wanted it to have this kind of maybe tap in. So if it was a haunted room and there was this legend attached to it, we would, or someone supposedly lived there, like the Kate Morgan room at the Hotel del Coronado, so we would bring someone dressed as Kate Morgan, take pictures of her in that room just to see what was going on, and test it out. But then I would do the deep dive research, and we would do our EVP stuff while we were doing the photo shoots and investigation. And then the only way to understand what was coming through audio wise or maybe visual wise was actually doing the deep dive. Now, having said that, when I was on Haunted Discoveries, I did major research going in before, because everything had to be very organized. The shoot had to be organized. And so I did as intensive research as possible. I mean, I was even pulling recipes from like some of these haunted videos, from the past, because I just like everything. I'm like I sponge. I just want to know everything. So that came in handy, knowing ahead of time. And I'll give you an example. This was a location we almost got into. There was a rainstorm damaged it, and so we had to drop it immediately. But it was the Washington Theater in Kentucky. And the story is, and the ghost stories that you'll find online, is that, there's a grave underneath the stage, and everyone sees this, or past people have seen someone like dressed in period clothes. So they made up the story about an actress during the early 1900s that played there when it was kind of a vaudeville house before it segued into motion pictures, and that she had died and that she was buried. Her last request was that she was buried in the basement. And so if we didn't do any research except what was online, that's what we would be going in. But I did deep research, and I found out that when they built that theater, they quietly built it on top of the Pioneer Cemetery, which was just in back. So there literally were graves underneath the stage. I did find this like 1890s article where actors were seeing ghosts outside the dressing room window. And that's a forgotten story that no one had unearthed before, but it came in very handy because we're trying to figure out, well, heck, these ghost stories go way back. In that grave is in fact a pioneer grave that, is just under the stage. So we already had this kind of figured out before we even set foot in that theater, what we thought was probably haunting it and what was responsible for the paranormal activity there. So it helps sometimes to know what's going on before you go there. But if you don't, it's perfectly okay as long as you have someone very anal retentive who will do the deep dive research afterwards and try to fill in the blanks before you just jump to conclusions. As I said earlier, you want not just to connect the dots, you want to connect the dots in the right order. And I've seen a lot of documents where they've been attempted to connect the dots correctly, but because they didn't do quite enough research, they got them out of order. And it'll throw everything off. It'll throw off what your findings are. It'll throw off everything if you don't have like some like real understanding of what the history of the property is.
I think it too, depends on, you hear that saying, well, it's not really a saying. It's very important that, it may not be the location itself. It could be the land that the location was built on. So keeping that in mind, obviously it's important to do both location research and of course research on the general land surrounding it. But in cases like, for example, the RMS Queen Mary, a ship, you'd have to also research where she was built, not just considering Long Beach, but where she was built, where she sailed, Southampton, Cherbourg, New York, and so on. So I think with ships or vessels that have moved and gone to different areas of the world, then that is just another layer of research that you need to do.
Yep. And you were talking about how paranormal and history blend. We were on an investigation. I'm not a ghost hunter. I am not a Bigfoot hunter. I'm not a UFO hunter, but I go with Bigfoot hunters, ghost hunters, and UFO hunters to get their stories and to document. And we were filming a thing for Travel Channel, and it was they were in the Brooksville May Stringer house in Brooksville, Florida, and I was there as the historian, just kind of happy to be there, right? And they were the psychic kept getting the word Murphy. Well, there's no Murphy family. It's the May and the Stringer families. There was no Murphy ever worked there because it became a museum later and it was abandoned for some time. So they were convinced it was some homeless guy or something that had squatted there and everything. And then finally I'm like, can I interject? And I'm like, I'm not on camera, but I can interject. And they're like, what? And I said, well, there's a lot of material here in this one wing that's all military from World War II. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, Camp Murphy was the training camp for many men before they went overseas. And it was right. All the Florida people were sent to Camp Murphy down in Port St. Lucie. And they were all like, oh, and it was like, boom, light bulb. And like, say, if you didn't have any history, they'd be looking for some guy named Murphy, or they would look for some artifact that might be attached to a Murphy. And suddenly they were like, that's why there's so many voices telling her Murphy. And it's like, yeah, they had a lot of accidents there. A lot of people died there. And I guarantee you some of their stuff is here. So
yeah, that's great. That's a good story right there. And I just have to say in a few minutes, I have to depart because I'm going on a podcast, but just to let everyone know, but go ahead.
No problem.
Well, I know at Gettysburg, of course, we had, I did the history beforehand, and that sort of leaks into everything else I've written and done, because I was a historian before I was a paranormal writer or investigator, and that just kind of came natural there. But the one time that I did do it the other way and research the locations, we did I did a book and developed a ghost tour for Fredericksburg, Virginia. And of course, Fredericksburg was in 1862 Civil War battlefield. Actually, 4 battles took place around there, and so every one of them was out in the wilderness. In fact, one of them was even called the Wilderness, and they brought the soldiers back to Fredericksburg, and so filled up all the houses and large buildings, churches, and so forth with the wounded. So when we were doing the tour, I had to go to each individual building and actually ask people, do you have any paranormal experiences you'd like to talk about? And would you like them on the tour? And sure enough, I did that kind of backwards. I mean, I knew basically what the history of Fredericksburg was, but doing that research, we did the locations first. And surprisingly, interestingly enough, is Carol and my wife and I discovered that the best time to find out about ghost stories is in the afternoon, and the best place to go to find ghost stories of the area is a local bar. And so we had
that's so true.
start our happy hours a little early on those days that we're doing quote research into ghost stories. But some of the bartenders know a lot of good ghost stories. They hear them from everybody, but so that's the time when we did it a little bit it backwards, but I kind of cheated at Gettysburg because I knew the history before. So,
Okay. And Nicole, I know you said you needed to get going, so thank you for joining us. And I just realized you are the only person on this panel that I have not met in person.
Oh no,
So
that
one
we
of
have
these
to
days we
change
gotta
that.
fix it.
Oh yes, we're doing it. Oh
And
my
I've been
gosh.
to Queen Mary, but not when you were there.
Oh well, we'll figure something out.
Okay.
It was nice to join you guys. Have a good night. Sorry I have to leave
you
early.
too, Nicole.
No problem.
All
Have a
right.
great night.
Bye
Yeah.
guys.
Bye.
And I only have a couple more questions, and then if the audience has any questions, please feel free to ask. And I know, Mark, you need to jump off of here in about 15 minutes. So the one
Right.
question I want to make sure I ask before you leave is, do you think paranormal investigators have a responsibility to preserve and present accurate history?
Absolutely. Yeah. And unfortunately, we've had a large number of new ghost tours that have come into Gettysburg recently. And, I'll hear them outside telling stories. And a lot of the stories are just purely made up. I mean, I've lived there for 30 years and, was a professional historian there for a while. And a lot of this stuff is just awful. And, if you have to make up the quote history to tell the ghost story, there's something, it just doesn't work. I mean, the history is part and parcel of the ghost story. I mean, it's why the ghost is there, because of the history. And if you have to make something up, I just think it's not kosher. So at any rate, did I answer your question? I hope.
You did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, they had, it's a lot of famous ghosts there, and there's a lot of stories there, and a lot of history there. And the one show that I'm not supposed to name by name, but rhymes with Schmost Adventures. But they did an episode there, and there was one room where they were discussing the ghost in there, and I consulted on that show, and I sent them the history, and they just ignored it. And so when you go on that tour now, you go on their paranormal tour, which is awesome. They will tell you, okay, so here is the room where Zach and crew found their ghost, but over here is where the ghost. That's fun. And you're talking about tours. That's at St. Augustine and just pretty much any city you go to, Savannah, Charleston. I mean, any major city has a ghost tour now. And they're generally that one of those three companies that do the national tours, and they all have the same stories. Not every city has the same story. They just, and it took place right here. And and then I hear people repeating it, and you'll even find it on the Wikipedia of that city after a little while, because somebody puts that in there, and you're like, no. And that's how, ghost stories grow and move. And, if you hear one more Romeo and Juliet story in your town, and, a lover's leap somewhere, they go back, the natives told this story. Well, that was a settler story, if anything else. The natives don't tell stories like that. So,
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, I agree with you 100%. Find your local guys, find the local tour, ignore the big companies.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm from Los Angeles, so we never have that problem.
And maybe
No.
detected some sarcasm.
No, that's actually what keeps me so darn busy, is because of the hype and the large amount of influencers and people that jump on and will say anything's on it, and I used to, for one summer, I tried just doing like a Hollywood Boulevard, tour where I just kind of lay it all out. I had to stop after a while because it felt like this was my Bizarre Los Angeles What's Not Haunted tour, or What's Not True tour, because I ended up spending much more time just shooting down what all the other tours and media has said. And so I'll give you like my favorite case in point. It just shatters people, tourists. But the Marilyn Monroe's ghost at the Hollywood Roosevelt and the Maryland Mirror. Marilyn Monroe, I can only find 2 instances of her ever being at that hotel. She never lived there, but that's used for marketing to charge people $5,000 a night to stay in the Marilyn Monroe suite. The picture of Marilyn Monroe hanging over the bed, it was not taken at the Roosevelt. It was taken at the Bel Air Hotel, which is secure. And I just try to tell people, use common sense. The Hollywood Roosevelt was a tourist hotel. Now, if you think a star like Marilyn Monroe, based on what you know about her life and her death, she would live in a tourist hotel? Seriously? The Maryland Mirror was actually, I found a inventory of mirrors that were put in the cabanas when they were constructed in the 50s, and it matches perfectly. Furthermore, they found that mirror in the basement during a mid-80s renovation, covered up. And so that was used for marketing purposes. Now, what's funny, and I say, look at where the ghost stories began and who started them. This is a great case in point. In the mid-80s, after the Roosevelt had reopened after a massive renovation, it was the 25th anniversary of Marilyn Monroe's death. And they were going to hold a big convention at the Chinese Theater, which is kind of catty corner. Well, there was so much enthusiasm for it that they decided they needed a bigger space. So they instead held it in the Blossom Room of the Hollywood Roosevelt. That did more for the Roosevelt as far as bringing in income. And they realized that Marilyn Monroe was a bigger brand in itself than the Roosevelt, that they started making things up. But the debut of the Marilyn Monroe ghost story actually happened in 1989 on an NBC Halloween special hosted by John Davidson. So there you go. And it's not true. And Marilyn Monroe, but people love to see that mirror. They love to hear the story. There were stars that went there, but they mostly went there for promotional purposes, to promote their latest film. And a few lived there briefly, but they weren't necessarily big A-list stars. And as far as the Montgomery Clift room and the Phantom Bugle, there are no records of what room Montgomery Clift actually stayed in. Those rooms were rented by Columbia in block form, probably even using an alias, but all those records are gone. What I've been only able to determine, which was through other people's books that were there and knew Montgomery Clift while he did stay there, was that there was a fire escape just right outside his window. And that's what he would use to go up and visit his friends. So I don't know, if Montgomery Clift actually stayed in the Montgomery Clift room. What people don't realize is that the Roosevelt has had over 35 deaths, including murders. So none of them famous, but there were some people that checked in and took their lives there. So there's definitely cause for it being haunted, but assigning a famous personality to it is suspicious at best.
Yeah.
That happens so much, though. I mean, Mark, you can testify to this. How many times somebody sees a ghost? Oh, it's Robert E. Lee up there. Or it could be, it was some dude in a uniform. So it's Robert E. Lee, James Longstreet. It could be, the 20th Maine, Chamberlain. It's Chamberlain. Down in Florida, it was Al Capone.
Yeah.
or Elvis. And it's like, how many Elvis slept here? George Washington slept here. And so, of course, his ghost is there. I'm a big believer that there might be cosplay ghosts Like if you're Uncle John in the haunted house and everybody says you look like Elvis, and enough people, it's the ghost of Elvis, you're going to be the ghost of Elvis because they don't care. I'm John. I'm going to dress up like Elvis from now on.
Yeah.
You're a ghost. Do whatever the heck you want. I am a firm believer that ghosts do that, or they get, there's some sort of tulpa, maybe, some, that they've been made that because the energy's there. We don't understand how this stuff works. We never will. It's until some serious stuff gets done with it. So it could be something like that. But Marilyn Monroe, that's perfect case in point. Some lady there. Oh, she's Marilyn Monroe. Yeah, it's because she came by once, drove down the street. Okay, and obviously it's her ghost.
Yeah. We get a lot of that in Gettysburg, and any reenactor. In fact, I got some pictures from somebody. I get a lot of photos. Any reenactor with a white beard, it's got to be Lee's ghost.
Got to be Lee's ghost. Yeah,
got to be Robert E. Lee's ghost.
We were at Droop Mountain in West Virginia, and they were doing a reenactment, and hell, Robert E. Lee showed up because they had a guy who was dressed as Robert E. Lee, and I'm like, I don't think he was at Droop Mountain, but whatever.
Yeah,
he gets around.
That's the other thing we have at Gettysburg is all the reenactors, and it's the first thing I ask when people say they've seen a ghost or a phantom regiment or whatever, is what time of year was it? If it was around July 4th, you think it might have been a reenactor, you know what I mean? Because we have reenactments at that time. So in the middle of winter, maybe, maybe it is a ghost, but you have to be very discerning when you start, listening to stories. And I listen to them all though, because the people believe what they saw. Or you'll know if they believe what they saw, and it does happen. People see stuff all the time.
Yeah. And that just goes back to like when we were talking earlier about the marketing starting it. I mean, I have it in one of my books, Gasparilla. He started off as a marketing campaign to get people to go to a hotel on an island, and he never existed. And now Tampa celebrates him every year with this huge festival, and people say they see his ghost.
Yeah.
The power of persuasion is very strong, and that's why you have to be kind of careful, when you're, if you're just in it for fun. And a lot of paranormal investigators they don't really care about the facts or not. They're just out there for the experience and the adventure. But those that are, kind of driven to I'm not out to prove personally that ghosts exist. I believe there's something there, but I'm mostly into checking to see whether there's merit behind the paranormal claims or not. And then just kind of going on from there. But I lead tours once a month at the Alexandria Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. And it's a 1906 building that an addition was added in 1911. It's actually where it was kind of the Plymouth Rock for the film industry when they started coming over around 1910, 1911. And Rudolph Valentino did stay there. And part of the tours, I take them to the Valentino suite. And I get some kind of perverse joy, sort of, in telling them once they're there that Valentino probably never set foot in that room. That was created in marketing in 1970, where they were taking certain rooms, giving it kind of a theme decor. And so the Valentino suite was thus dubbed in 1970. They just picked a room that has paranormal activity. And so when things did happen, things have happened to me in that place. But it's not Valentino. It's something else that happened in that room. But that started the Valentino ghost. And of course, he haunts 5-6 places in Southern California. The guy gets around.
And I know, Mark, you said you needed to go, but I only have one more question. Do you want to stick around for that, or do you want to head out?
I'm good for about another 20 minutes now, I guess, because they delayed till 10:30. So we're
okay,
good.
Perfect. And other Mark?
Yes, me.
You both had to leave after an
Well,
hour.
I'm good. I'm good for
I
one
was
more question.
wondering which Mark had to leave. I'm looking and seeing two of you.
This Mark has to leave, but I'm good for one more.
We're all popular. It's
Yeah.
the way it goes. So.
No,
Yep.
trust me, I get it. But yeah, one more question. So it's more or less kind of your perception on the paranormal field or the world. Have you ever had one case where the historical data has completely changed how you view paranormal? I stumped y'all.
Yeah.
Well, I've got one,
Go
but I
ahead.
was going to let Mark answer.
Go ahead, Mark. No, go ahead, Mark.
All
I'll
right.
think about that in a second.
Yeah, there was one that was this. We were up in Appalachia and looking into the Greenbrier ghost, which is an amazing story because it's the one time ghostly evidence was able to actually convict a killer. And this young lady had fallen down the stairs or something. According to the autopsy, she had died of a prolonged faint. And so, which means heart attack in those days. But her husband was had wrapped her up in a dress and had wrapped her neck in her favorite scarf, and he wouldn't leave her side. And the whole family's like, this is suspicious. He went through the funeral and, was just distraught, wouldn't let anybody get too close to the body. They buried her. And then her mother said her daughter came to her 3 nights in a row and told her, my husband murdered me. His name is Trout. It's not Erasmus. And he strangled me. And she went to the prosecutor and said, we have to prosecute this. And he's like, I can't tell him a ghost did it, but I'll do some research. And the history of the guy turned out, his name was Trout. He had a previous wife who had died mysteriously, and he had a second wife who had threatened that he would murder her, so she had divorced him. And so they were able to try it. And he's like, we're not going to mention the ghost story. We're not going to mention the ghost story. We're not going to mention the ghost story. And he's like just trying it on all this other stuff. And then sure enough, the defense is trying to debunk the mom. And so they call her up. Isn't it true that you thought this was because of a ghost? And she said, yeah. And so they introduced the ghostly evidence, and the jury believes it and convicts her because they're like, she's a true soul. She would never lie about a ghost. So the man gets convicted and hung. And so, but the history for that was that this ghost came and claimed vengeance. None of that trial stuff or anything was anywhere in it. And then now you dig it up, you start looking into it, and it's like, boom, there it makes sense. Now it's there. And so yeah, that's where history totally changed that I think documents the ghost.
Yeah.
Because it never would have even been looked into. He would have gotten away with it again. Mm-hmm. And then he dies in Moundsville prison, years later. So good for him. But that floored me on how history shaped the legend. Mm-hmm. And now that's the important part of the story is that, the trial, now it's a trial, a ghost. They changed the historical sign in West Virginia to say the only trial where a ghost convicted a killer instead of just the only time a ghost, convicted a killer. And now it's her testimony convicted a killer. So it's little subtle changes, but it's nice to see that they're willing to adapt.
Yeah.
Well, very quickly, I could tell you the one about the woman in white. For years and years, Spangler Spring has been known for sightings of the woman in white. And I was giving a talk, and a couple came up to me and they said, the woman in white that you talk about all the time? I said, yeah. And they said, she lives in our house. And sure enough, I went over there, and they live in a house right near Spangler Spring. And they took me on a tour, and I actually took along a psychic. Okay. And she said, yeah, well, she didn't say anything about the woman in white. She went around the house and she said, yeah, I know what happened here and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And she didn't say anything about any woman in white. And finally we said, did you get anything about a woman dressed in white? She said, oh yeah, that's the nun I see walking around. And we're like, a nun? Could that be the woman in white from Spangler Spring? And then I realized right after the battle, the Daughters of Charity from the convent in Emmitsburg, Maryland, just 7 miles south of the battlefield, all came up to tend to the wounded. And they were in those, the typical flying nun habits, with the hats and stuff like that. And that's where a psychic actually helped solve and backed up the history of backed up by the history of the Daughters of Charity, who came up to the battlefield. So yes, that does happen.
Mhm. Yep.
So, but I think I have to
Great.
go though.
Okay, no
Yeah.
problem. Thank you for joining us, Mark. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay,
Bye,
thank
Mark.
you, Heather.
Nice
So long,
to meet
guys.
you. I have a lot of stories, and I don't even quite really know how to answer that question. I would say that I've had a few things that have happened that kind of justify, like an impression I had. Sometimes you just stumble, maybe through obsessive research, you stumble upon a clue, a missing piece to the puzzle that suddenly makes the paranormal claims make more sense. Is that kind of where you're getting at with your
Yeah.
question? Okay.
Yes.
I think one of my favorite things that my favorite stories, and this was just almost by chance, like almost blind luck, was Catalina Island. There's this village called Two Harbors, but back in the day, it wasn't called that. It was called the Isthmus, and there was always this talk about a lady in white, a white dress, Edwardian, that's been seen on the outskirts of town. And because the owners at one point in the early 1900s one of the brothers had built a house there. They thought it was a mistress, and somehow or another, this ghost is connected to that house. And so this kind of weird trying to explain why this woman has been seen. And so I researched this family, the Banning family. There's nothing that even remotely comes close to a connection to that family or that building. But in a very small little articles, I don't even know how I came across it. I guess I was just looking through everything very intensely, but I came across a story of a woman who was newlywed, and she had checked into the tent city in the Isthmus with her husband when they had a little tent city there. They had gone out hiking. The sun had come down, and whoever was the manager of Tent City, these people were not accounted for. So they started trying to put together some kind of search party to go out looking for them. They eventually find the husband, and he's like acting stark raving mad. And he said that his wife had died. And so they said, well, you need to show us where she is. We need to find her. And he couldn't find her. He was so lost for so many hours that they were like, what is wrong with this guy? He doesn't even know where his wife is. He's acting like he's crazy, And so they divide up into different groups because his directions are worthless. So they eventually find her. Now, he had told them that she had been rock climbing and she fell off a rock and dashed to her death. But what they found instead was an upright dead woman. And when they looked at her arm, she had track marks up and down. And they found a vial of morphine, empty. So she was a junkie, like circa 1903, 1904. What had happened once the guy kind of came out to his senses, he finally told what happened. Is they were picnicking, she injected, OD'd, was dead. He tried to kill himself, but there wasn't enough morphine to kill him, but it made him crazed, and he lost his way. And he eventually found his way back. Now, that's what the coroner came to the conclusion. She is buried in an unmarked grave on the side of that village where this lady in white has been seen. And that, to me, that's the missing piece. I think that, if I were detectives, that's my number one suspect right there. I have another quick story. Again, this comes with having good research and not just listening to what everyone says and urban legends that are found online. There's a hotel in Ventura. I'm turning into a ghost here. I'm kind of blurring out. It's closed now, but it had a famous ghost back in the 90s. Sylvia Michael. And there was a local historian / psychic / tour guide who would tell the story of Sylvia Michaels in room 17 of the Bella Maggiore Inn. She worked as a prostitute. She came from Atlantic City during the World War II. She gets pregnant after having an affair with a married sailor who just abandons her once the war ends and he gets decommissioned. So she hangs herself in a closet in room 17. And as the story goes, you don't go in there singing Anchors Away because her ghost is there still looking for her lover. And they even had a police sketch do a thing and published it in the paper as all marketing and stuff. Okay, well, as fate would have it, I decided I would investigate and I would stay in that room for a few days. And I did hire a model to do a photo shoot. I dressed him up as a gob, as a Navy guy, which is what everyone says don't do. And we hung out in that place for hours, taking photos, doing EVP sessions. Nothing in that room. It's because it was an urban legend. I kind of had a feeling it was an urban legend before then, but there is paranormal activity in that room. And on my last night, I even had it. But what was a recurring theme had to do with toiletry items being moved in the bathroom. And, one of the things I learned from the staff is that this is an old 1920s building that used to have shared baths. That's the only room in the whole building that has a full bathroom, like a shower and a bathtub and a toilet. Well, Sylvia Michaels was ever existed. There's no death record of a suicide, period, in Ventura. But the smoking gun was when I started finding out that room there was no closet in the 40s. I looked at the original floor plan and it was the shared men's bathroom back in the day. And so that explains why toiletry items are being moved around, right? It totally makes sense that is it. There was no closet for a Sylvia Michaels to hang herself. And so all of this stuff that had been told for decades in people's books, or this particular tour guide's books, it was in the tours they would charge people. He was just telling people stuff. And then I looked into how he came across that story. And what happened was there were some strange things happening in that room. The owner at the time, who's now gone, had told me in a bar, he says, don't tell anybody until I'm dead. But I made that story up. But it was a mail order bride that came over. And I was doing that because the workers were from Greece. So he invented her as a Greek mail order bride. Well, when this paranormal tour guide heard the story, he goes with his psychic wife, and they charge people, and they have a seance. And it was during those seances at Halloween that suddenly the story moved from a mail order bride from Greece who killed herself to a prostitute from Atlantic City who worked at a hotel as a brothel. And then there are two different versions. The one is that she hung herself, and then the other version is that maybe she was murdered by a jealous purser in the Navy. Mm-hmm. So I started checking that. They made both of those stories up a few years apart. So, what do you do about that? I mean, it's obviously that the evidence is there that was not that was never a bedroom in the 1940s. It was a shared bath. And interestingly enough, on my last night there, I had a recorder just playing as I slept. What the recorder ended up picking up were heavy male boots walking across a hardwood floor, even though it's carpeted where I'm at. And I hear this booming, deep voice, which also is more indicative of that being a shared male bathroom than a room that's haunted by a dead prostitute. And I've got other stories too where things just make sense once you of what the real history is. Just a real quick one. There's a place in Temecula where it still has shared baths, and somewhere in the 80s or 90s, they switched genders for a while. So the men became the women's and the women's became the men. Well, there was a paranormal investigator contacted me, and he said, I walked into the men's restroom and with my recorder, and a woman told me to get out of there. And he had no idea that was the women's restroom at that time, not the men's. So it totally makes sense. It totally lines up with the history of the property and what that room was used for.
Yep, exactly. Well, I can't thank you guys enough for joining us. It was great seeing you again, Mark, on the show. As always, love having you on. We'll definitely have you back. And Craig, thank you for joining tonight. Miss chatting with you. Oh my God, it's been almost 2 years now. Can't believe it's been that long since you and I were at Waverly.
Yeah, that was also an interesting experiment where, and that is another phase of the question you just asked is, emotion seems to trigger paranormal activity too, not just knowledge of history, but sometimes the emotion that you bring into it. And when you get people recalling loved ones that had passed and something very emotional. And in this particular case, we were at Waverly Hills, which would have been chock full of people with heavy emotion going on, missing their loved ones, wondering if they're ever going to make it out alive. And so when people shared their emotions and their personal stories and would get all teary-eyed or get angry or just whatever's being stirred up inside just talking about these incidents, then suddenly, boom, something happens. It's like the emotional charge triggers something that's already there. And just trying to reach a connection. And just in final word is that the reason why I got into this is I love history, but a lot of us, I think, deep down inside wish we could time travel. And I'm literally trying to connect to the history of a location. And if there's any way, as a historian, that we can do it in an entertaining enough way where people can connect into that history, then you're one step closer to, having a paranormal experience.
Yeah, exactly. So I will make sure I get your guys' information shared out. Any last words before we go? Mark, I know you got to get going here in a minute.
I know one more quick thing about we earlier talking about researching location or researching the history. make sure you go to the location if you can. If it is private property, don't go there. If it is, condemned property, don't go there. If when you're reading a Wikipedia or some ghost page that says, oh, the most haunted location in town is the old Simmons house, and you go there and you expect to walk in and it's no longer a haunted location, a museum or anything. Now it's a private home, and you walk up to that door, you might get shot and become the new ghost there. So don't do it.
Exactly.
Especially in the Appalachians, you go down those hollers, you may not be coming back if you aren't invited in. So so definitely research the location and make sure it's okay to go there. That's one of our things, Erie Travels. We only put places in that you can go, or at least we say, all right, you can't go there anymore. Got bulldozed, got turned over, but you can go to that Walmart parking lot and get the same experience.
Yep. Yeah, I know in my books I always put this location is no longer accessible, but I still share it.
If it's got a good story, yeah, of course. And we're keeping the stories alive. And that's one of the things, with the folklore. If you follow the folklore, you'll find something really is there that they're trying to explain with, a folk tale. And then, share it. Keep it alive, because, the Meemaws and Peepaws are dying and the kids are playing on the phone and they're not keeping these stories alive. So that's why us historians, folklorists, paranormal investigators we all are keeping the history alive, and that's the beauty of it. So Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Craig,
Nice meeting you, Mark.
No, nice meeting you, Craig. We're gonna have to get you on my show at some point. So
yes,
I'll reach out.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
So you've literally watched the sunset on me.
I know. I was just noticing it was getting
dark on me. It's dark on me here in the Smokies, but I do studio lighting.
Here in LA. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think, if you're a property owner of a haunted place, there's a lot of people, because of bad behavior, they just stopped or closed the door. And that's really kind of sad. That's why I have this Roy Rogers rule of ethics. It's I won't walk into a property unless I have permission to, and all that stuff. I don't suppose we'll ever stop bad behavior in the paranormal. They kind of go hand in hand sometimes. But what I do think, if you're a property owner, is that if you want to bring in younger people, the paranormal is the best way. The Queen Mary, that's the one thing that kept it going, was they had tried different marketing stuff, from plays to museum pieces to Titanic exhibits and stuff. All the marketing people that they hired to figure out what would bring them back, they failed. It failed miserably. They'd overgutted it, and people could see the whole thing in one day. But the paranormal, that was proven that it brought more people back, second, third, fourth, fifth time. And they were in denial of it for a long time. They didn't want to do it, but they did. And so that's the one thing that they won't give up. Sometimes they go too far with it, where you have 3 different ghost walks, and each one has a completely different version on everything. But why do you think they have 3? It's because that's the only marketing thing that really works there. Glen Tavern Inn, not for their marketing, I'm not sure if that place would have been open. Always try to tell property owners to, control the message, or someone will control it for you. But that's the best way to bring in and introduce a younger crowd. In LA, we've lost the Brown Derby, we lost the Ambassador Hotel, we've lost a lot of old Hollywood locations through the years, because there wasn't that younger generation that was reached out to and appealed to. Had they gone with the hauntings, those buildings would still be around and still be going. But if you don't, if you're just, your clientele grows old and they die off. So it is proven that paranormal marketing done smart, done ethically, can be very healthy. And for every one person that won't go there because it's haunted, you're going to get one person that will go there because it's haunted.
Exactly. Yep. And again, thank you both for a great night. I'll definitely be in contact with both of you to get you back on the show again in the future. And then thank you everybody for watching. Make sure to join us next week, same time, same place. And we have Lloyd Arbach joining us with a presentation on how to select a psychic to go on your next investigation with you. It's going to be a great one. See you guys all in a week. Have a great night.
Good night.